Come on.
Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. This happened to me about 11 years ago when I was walking home from a friend's house at night. I'll just get straight into it. I used to live in a rural part of the UK and have lived in rural areas most of my life, so I was used to long walks, occasionally at night, especially before I could drive. They never bothered me too much. I'd get creeped out occasionally, but this one night was the most terrifying experience I ever had. There was this one friend who used to live roughly 3 miles away from my house. He had cool parents, and my other friends and I would often go over to his house and play video games and hang out. Occasionally, this meant walking home at night if I stayed late. There were 2 ways back from his house. The roadway, which was about 5 miles long and took about 30 to 45 minutes. The roads were very quiet and eerie sometimes, but they were lit by street lamps, so it never bothered me walking this way. The other way was a shortcut through some woods, which took off about 2 miles, and the wooded bit was about a mile or so long. I often favored the wooded shortcut, and have probably walked it over 100 times. The woods were dark. However, combined with the lack of ambient light due to living in a rural area, you had absolute abyssal darkness. Luckily, most of the time I had my phone light to walk with, but sometimes my phone would die, or the battery would be so low that the flash wouldn't work, and I'd have to use my screen light. As you've probably guessed by now, this was one of those occasions. I remember my friends and I having just finished watching a film. It was nearing 10 p.m., so we all left my friend's house and headed our separate ways home. I contemplated briefly which way I should go and decided to take the shortcut through the woods. I started walking away from his house and towards the path that headed into the woods. The streetlights dimmed as I entered the fields before the woods. I glanced at my phone and saw my battery was really low. Only enough power left for a couple of minutes of flash, and then I'd have to use my screen for light. That wouldn't last the whole way either. As I saw the tree line approaching, I switched on the flash and followed the well-trodden path into the dark. To my dismay, my light died within seconds of entering, and I flipped my phone over to try and shine the way using the screen. As I walked, I looked out for all of the familiar landmarks I was used to seeing to ensure I was heading in the right direction. A funky tree stump. Check. A half-fallen fir tree. Check. And an enormous puddle I had to jump over. Check. And an enormous puddle I had to jump over. All was going well. I was halfway through the woods when my phone completely died. I remember the moment it happened. I was engulfed in darkness. I'm not sure if you've experienced this level of darkness before, but it was so dark that I couldn't even see the outline of my hand centimeters in front of my face. Naturally, my pace slowed considerably, and I started holding my hand out in front of me to make sure I wasn't going to walk into a tree or something. I continued walking for another minute or so, until all of a sudden a pungent smell hit me. Cigarette smoke. I glanced around but couldn't see anything. Then I heard it. A cough. I wasn't alone. Thoughts raced through my head. Who would be out in the woods in the dark? Are they following me? Am I lost? I quickened my pace again, throwing a little caution to the wind. I carried on walking and tripped slightly on a branch. As I regained my balance, I heard another sound. Branches breaking underfoot. What sounded like right behind me. The snapping turned into fast footsteps that grew louder and louder. I started sprinting. I felt the well-trodden path turn to brush. I felt branches, logs, and plants hitting my legs. It wasn't long before I fell hard. I was lying on the floor, holding my knee. I could still hear branches snapping around me and a voice muttering something. I didn't dare move. Then, all of a sudden, they turned on a torch. I couldn't see anything except for the beam of light, which seemed to be eaten quickly by the darkness of the forest. I lay motionless on the ground as the beam swept through the trees. I could still hear the person mumbling with a deep growl. The crunching of footfalls grew and grew. They were only several feet from me by this point. I couldn't breathe. The light went out, the snapping of branches grew, and then nothing. Quiet. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't see anything. Then I could hear wheezing. Right. Above. Me. I wanted to cry. I wasn't sure if the person could see me or not. They could have been staring right at me, and I wouldn't know. This carried on for about 5 minutes, until the crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs started up again and got fainter and fainter as they moved away from me. I remained lying down for another 5 or 10 minutes, contemplating my escape. Like an idiot. I'd run off the path and wasn't sure which way was back to it or was home. I didn't really care. I thought I was going to walk in one direction until I left the woods and got home from there. I knew that as soon as I started moving again, if the person was still in the woods, they would hear me. Should I run or try to sneak out? I opted for the latter. I slowly rose to my feet, listening constantly to my surroundings. Picked a direction and started walking. I wasn't perfectly quiet, but quiet enough to be sure I wouldn't be heard from too far away. I kept hearing snapping sounds and rustling in the distance, and every time I froze, I'd hold my breath until I was happy no one was there, and then start walking again. I repeated this pattern for what felt like an eternity until eventually I found the path. I screamed for joy in my mind and sped up my pace. After another 10 minutes, I saw it. Light. Street lights are filtering in through the trees. I'd never been so happy to see a meager street lamp, but as I progressed to the end of the woods, my heart sank. At the end of the path, there was a black silhouette. Unmoving, contrasted against the light background, was the dark figure of a man. What should I do? Maybe it's a different person. Perhaps it's someone walking their dog. I froze and watched them silently, but they didn't move. At all. They just stood there, like they were guarding the entrance to the woods. I didn't know what to do. By this point, I'd had enough. I was so close to getting out that I decided to just run straight towards the exit. Straight towards them. I was a 6th young man. If they wanted to stop me, they'd have a hard job of it, I thought. So that's what I did. I started sprinting. The figure grew and grew, and as I reached them, I stepped to the side. I heard someone growl "fuck" loudly and felt something clip the back of my head and tug the back of my jacket. I cleared the sheep gate in one leap and sprinted into the light. I eventually stopped running when I could see the first house and looked back. The entrance to the woods was quite far away now, and I couldn't see anyone standing by the entrance. Relaxing a bit more now, I finished my walk home. That's pretty much it. I know I could have overreacted. It could have been someone out for a walk in the woods, a dog walker, or a camper. But what I thought was strange was that they didn't use their torch except briefly on one occasion. Once they heard me, they also actively sought me out. Who knows what would have happened if they caught me? In any case, I never walked that way home alone again. Not at night anyway. I was on an assignment for the Army, making my way up from San Antonio, Texas to Tacoma, Washington. It was a long drive, and they gave me 6 days to report to my new unit. But I didn't mind. I love road trips. There's nothing like the freedom of exploring the world by yourself. The first day of my journey, I planned to get as much driving in as possible so I could spend a few days in Utah. A sort of mini vacation, you could say. This was January, and the days were short, so maximizing the amount of daylight I had was crucial. I got up extra early that morning, carried the last of my bags out to my Corolla, signed out of my old unit, and hit the road at roughly 5 a.m. It was an amazing day. I saw the landscape transform around me as I headed farther west than I had ever been in my life. From the San Antonio metropolitan area to the savannas of the Edwards Plateau to the Pancake, flat farmland of the Great Plains region, America's breadbasket, finally, the farms opened up into the prairie, and I saw the welcome to New Mexico. the land of enchantment sign. Now I was really in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on US Route 380, I eventually found myself in Roswell. I could have gotten a few more hours of driving in and made it to Albuquerque. But I figured since I was in no rush, I might as well see what Roswell had to offer. Who knows if I will get a chance to visit again. As a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, as Mr. Ballin would say, I took a self-guided tour of the shops and attractions. The next day, I continued to Albuquerque, then westward on Interstate 40. By the time I reached Gallup and started northbound on Route 491, I still had 2 hours of driving left before crossing the border into Colorado, and another 45 minutes before I would get to Cortez. My plans stopped for the night. However, my daylight was already running out, as sunset was at 6 p.m. I got Starbucks and refreshed myself for the final stretch. It was supposed to be easy, just a straight shot. But looking back on it now, I figured that, had I decided to stop in Albuquerque instead of Roswell the night previous, I would have already been in Colorado by now, and possibly be making my way into Utah. I would have saved myself from what was waiting for me on that desolate highway. Route 490. One stretched far into the Navajo Nation. On either side of me were endless expanses of prairie, bookended by dark indigo mountains on the horizon. To my left, the sky glowed a faint orange, purple, the light slowly dying down like smoldering embers in a fire, until finally plunging the land into darkness. Every now and then, I would see the forlorn headlights of another car passing by, which gave me a bit of relief that I wasn't alone. I also had my road trip playlist on to keep me company. Call me ironic. But Hotel California was playing. After passing the small, lonely town of Newcomb, the next piece of civilization would be Shiprock. However, between the two was a 36-mile stretch of absolute nothingness, an abyss I had to cross. I was not ready for what I was about to witness. After several miles, and having not seen another car on the road, I saw something strange emerge from the horizon, barely lit by the moonlight. I thought it was a road sign at first. Then, as I came closer, I realized it was a person walking on the shoulder of the road, heading in my direction. I squinted, trying my hardest to focus on the figure. In the darkness, I could tell they were wearing a poncho of some sort, with long black hair flowing down past their chest. Who could be walking out here, all alone, at night? I thought. Whoever it was, they had no lights, no reflectors, and no strobes of any kind to signal to passing cars that they were there, and they walked on the pavement, dangerously close to oncoming traffic. I pulled to the left a bit, giving them a wide berth. Suddenly, my stereo cut out, as if I had turned it off. The screen went completely dark, and my phone disconnected from Bluetooth. While this was unusual, it certainly did happen from time to time. So I thought nothing of it. As I approached, I saw the person raise their right arm as if to flag me down and hitch a ride. Oh, no, 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 I thought. There's no way that's happening, buddy. As my headlights swept by, I realized it was a man dressed in a button-up shirt, a wool poncho, jeans, and cowboy boots. His large belt buckle glinted as the lights passed him. But in that split second, I realized with abject shock that not only were his eyes painfully wide open, but they seemed to be tracking me. Somehow, he was able to see me through the glare of my headlights and look me dead in the eyes, not breaking contact until I passed. I was shaken for a bit, but my nerves gradually subsided. My stereo abruptly turned back on, and my music continued playing. I brushed everything off as simply my imagination. The darkness and the shadows are playing tricks on my mind. Besides, the man was behind me. I figured he must have been drunk. I looked in my rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him. Maybe he's too far behind me. No, that couldn't be. It must be too dark. I drove on, trying to figure out what had just happened. But at the same time, forcing myself not to think about it. Just when I thought I had moved on, I saw another shape in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was another figure, another person walking alone at night. There's no way. They walked along the shoulder of the road, swaying back and forth. Slowly, I could make out that this person was also wearing a poncho. Then I saw what looked like long, black hair, reaching down past the chest. No, there's no way. It was the man. The same man, but how? The man raised his arm again, trying to flag me down. What did this guy want? I kept up my pace, with no intention of stopping for any reason. Just like last time, my stereo turned off again. Suddenly, the man leapt out onto the road, arms waving frantically. I swerved into the left lane, narrowly avoiding him. In my headlights, I noticed he had the same wide-eyed look, his gaze locked onto mine. I also saw that his clothes did not look as they did in our first encounter. Once they were clean, if not well worn, but now they were soiled and tattered, rags barely hanging onto his withered frame. His hair was wild and unkempt, with clods of dried dirt stuck in the locks, but his eyes remained the same. My heart nearly burst through my chest at the sudden shock. Hyperventilating, I slowed down and glanced into the rearview mirror to make sure he was all right. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. The man was running. He was sprinting toward me. I centered the wheel and accelerated, hoping to get as much distance from him as possible. But as I continued to speed up, so did he. Faster and faster I drove. But every time I looked in the mirror, I would still see him right behind me, perfectly keeping pace, his body tinted red by my taillights. I could feel my temples throbbing and my hands getting slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I was sick to my stomach. There's no way. I looked forward, hoping to see a faint glimmer of light from the town ahead, but I was still too far away. I looked back at the rearview mirror. The man was gone. I should have been relieved, but I knew better. Where did he go? I looked around, hoping to regain a visual of him. I couldn't see anything. Taking a deep breath, I refocused on the road, but kept my guard up. Just keep driving, I told myself. There are only a few more miles to go. Out of the corner of my right eye, I saw something. Another shape. It wasn't the man. At least I didn't think so. I glanced over, bracing myself for whatever was going to meet my eye. It looked like an animal. Some kind of animal, though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Under the moonlight, I could see it running alongside my car, its forelimbs reaching out in long strides, and its back undulating like a dog. Closer and closer. It came. Then I noticed that its limbs were far too long for its body. Its body was too short. It had no tail. The head was oddly round, and from it came a trail of long black hair. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car's engine harder than it had ever been pushed before. By now, I was clocking well over 110 miles per hour, but this creature kept up. It wasn't phased. It simply ran faster and faster to match my speed. Just what was this thing? How could anyone or anything run this fast? The entity seemed to have endless stamina. Just how long could it keep this up? Just how much faster could it go? Soon, my car would hit its top speed. And then what? How long could it maintain that before breaking down? It wouldn't be long until my engine overheated. But regardless, I would eventually run out of gas. And when I do, what would happen if that thing got me? At 120 miles per hour, my car had reached its limit. This was the fastest I could go, but the creature continued its pursuit. My temperature gauge was approaching the red, and so was my tachometer. I couldn't keep this up any longer. Suddenly, like the beacon of a lighthouse on a tumultuous sea, the first light of Shiprock came into view. It was close, so close. If I could just go a little longer, I could make it into town, to safety. I pressed on. I fixed my eyes on the lights, which were growing brighter on the horizon. They bloomed outward, glimmering in the night air. Though it was a small town, it was a sight for sore eyes in my situation. Looking in my periphery, I saw the undulation of the creature's spine as it kept pace with my car. But now it was slipping away, steering farther and farther from the road. It suddenly hit me just how hard my heart was beating. Beads of sweat dripped down my face. I looked over. The creature was gone. But this time, the feeling of dread had also gone with it. My stereo once again turned back on, and as my music resumed, I breathed a deep sigh of relief. I let off the accelerator. The man, the creature, whatever it was finally gone for good, having white-knuckled the steering wheel the whole time without realizing it. My hands were extremely sore, but I was glad to have made it through. A week later, I told another soldier in my unit about what I had experienced. Being originally from Albuquerque, she was familiar with the Native American legends of the Southwest. The conversation steered toward a certain creature that she would not dare speak the name of. She also told me that the highway I took was well known for all sorts of paranormal phenomena. Google what Route 491 used to be called and everything will make sense. Be careful out there. I'll start by saying that nothing could have prepared me for what I was going to discover the morning after a night out. It started as every other night would. Me and my family got ready to head to our local bar for a fundraising event. I had just turned 18 and was looking forward to having a chill night with friends and family. I knew most of the people there, so I was feeling really relaxed. While at the bar, I went to pay for my drink when the bartender told me it had already been paid for. When I went to see who had paid for it, I saw my cousin's partner. He is around 12 years older than me, give or take. I gave him a quick wave and we did the normal niceties, like hi. How are you doing? It's important to note that I had barely spoken more than 2 words to him before, as he was usually quiet or retreated to his room when we would go and visit my cousin. After saying thank you, I thought nothing of it. Nothing seemed off with our little interaction. By the end of the night, I had gathered my family together and told them I wanted to head home. At this point in time, I was still living at home with my mother. She had made plans to stay at my grandmother's house that night, so I was going to go home and sleep. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was outside having a smoke, about to head to my car. Just as I was about to head to my car, I heard someone call my name, so I turned to find my cousin's partner walking towards me. He asked if I was heading home for the night, which I thought was weird. So I said it's late, so I was calling it a night. Without skipping a beat, he mentioned the car that I drive and said he would see me around sometime. At this point, I got a bit creeped out, so I said goodnight and walked off to my car. There were plenty of people outside, so I wasn't concerned at all. Once I got in the car, my phone went off, and it was my mother. She was begging and pleading with me to go and stay at my grandmother's house for the night, saying that she had a really bad feeling. Initially, I was really annoyed. I just wanted to go home and go to sleep in my own bed. But she insisted. I couldn't understand why. I was used to being alone at home at night, but she wouldn't let it go. I hung up and started driving home. I couldn't be bothered going to my grandma's when my house was just down the road. I was tired. I just wanted to go home. Not even halfway home, my phone went off, so I pulled over to check it. It was my sister asking me to please go stay at my grandma's house. I was pissed off at this point and decided it would be easier to go to my grandma's house instead of arguing with my family. When I got to my grandma's house, everyone was asleep. Now I was really pissed off and went straight to sleep. The night was uneventful, but I woke up in the morning to my family talking about how they all had a feeling of dread, which is why they didn't want me to go home alone that night. My mother and I left for home at lunch. I felt off as soon as we pulled into the driveway. Once I got to the door, I found a police card wedged into the door to call them ASAP. I went inside and found my mother's camera on the kitchen table. This was a huge red flag, as it was in my bedroom before we left for the fundraiser. I went to my room to find that my entire room had been ransacked. No other room in our house had been touched. My blankets had been pulled back, and it looked like someone had been in my bed. My knickers were wide open, and some were also sprawled on the floor. Another camera of my mother's was also on the table where my TV was, which was directly opposite my bed. Clothes were everywhere. By this point, I was losing my shit. If I had gone home like the plan all along, I would have made my way through the house and then crawled into bed without switching my lamp on. I had done this so many times previously, and I wouldn't have seen the state of my room at all. My mother gave them a call to find out what happened, and what she told me made the blood drain from my face. Police were alerted to a break-in at our next-door neighbor's house when our neighbors found a man wandering inside their house. The man claimed he was my friend and went into the wrong house, and they chased him out. Our house had a big 8 by 12 meter deck that looked over my neighbor's house. They called the police again when they spotted the same man smoking on our deck. The police arrived at our house at 2 a.m., but since I wasn't home, no one answered the door. They noticed the lights on, so they went inside to investigate. They made their way through the house and found a man hiding in my bedroom in the dark. He couldn't give a reason why he was there or why he was hiding in my room. They had arrested him, taken him to the station, and wanted to know if we knew him. It turns out it was my cousin's partner, and he had been hiding in my bedroom for over an hour, waiting for me to get home because he knew I would be going home that night. My mother's gut feeling saved me from going home alone that night, and my neighbor's vigilance helped catch a creep. I always listen without question whenever she has a bad feeling. Who knows what would have happened? All I know is that it wouldn't have been pretty. He was charged with breaking and entering, and he spent some time in jail before being released and moving to another country. Always trust your mother's gut feeling, people. It sure saved me from having to deal with that. This is a story my parents told me. It happened in the mid-90s. My German parents just started dating a couple of months ago, and they did a little weekend getaway to Prague. They had a great time, and on their last day, they decided to do a guided city tour. Since Prague is a popular city for Germans, they quickly found a tour in German. The guide was super nice, and they quickly made new friends in the group. It was another young couple from Germany, and they planned on having drinks afterwards together since they got along very well. The tour took around 3 hours, and the last stop was at some kind of tower. Everyone wanted to get up there, except the young man my parents chatted with the whole time. He said he was already very tired and offered to wait next to the entry, and that everyone could leave their bags with him. My parents and the man's girlfriend went up there. They had a great view, and when they came back down after maybe 15 minutes, the man was nowhere to be found. All the bags were still in front of the bench where he wanted to rest. Nothing was missing. His girlfriend immediately felt very uneasy, since her man was usually very dutiful and would never just leave, especially with all the personal belongings unattended. Most people left after a while, but my parents waited with the young woman. They assumed that he got sick or something and asked at every shop and bar near the spot if they saw him. No one did. He was nowhere to be found. My parents later brought her to the police, where she filed a missing person report for him. They also checked every hospital in the city. The next day, my parents had to go back home. They did exchange phone numbers to catch up. They talked to her on a regular basis for several years, but the information did not change over the years. The man was nowhere to be found. Especially during the 1990s, the Czech Republic was known to have a huge problem with human and especially organ trafficking. It was nothing new for the police in Prague that tourists would just disappear. The police told the woman that someone probably lured him into a building or a quiet side road by asking for his help. You can imagine what probably happened from there on. My parents talked to the woman for the last time about 10 years ago. She was then happily married and had 2 kids. But she said that not a single day passed where she did not think about her young lover, and if he could still be out there somewhere.